The last thing I expected on my 73rd birthday was to be called a mistake. But there it was, spoken aloud, like it had been sitting on my son's tongue for years, just waiting for the perfect moment to slice me open. And that moment? My birthday dinner. The roast I spent the afternoon seasoning, the cake I baked from my late husband's favorite recipe, the card I signed to myself because nobody else remembered. I smiled through it all, as any mother would, until he stood up, red in the face, and screamed that I ruined his life. I blinked, still holding the serving spoon, and realized that somewhere along the way, the child I raised had rewritten our entire story. And in his version, I was the villain. There's a kind of silence that comes only when you leave behind the house you thought you'd die in. When I closed the door on my little white home on Sycamore Street, the one with the daffodils lining the walkway and the creaky porch swing Earl had built from scratch, I wasn't just leaving a place. I was closing the final chapter of a life that had once felt full. I had called Calvin that night, 3 years ago. After I signed the papers, he didn't answer on the first ring, or the second. But when he finally picked up, I told him the truth. I sold the house. Honey, I'm ready to move closer to you. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He just said, "That's great, Mom," and then paused before adding, "You think you can wire the money straight to the business account? The timing is kind of tight." $210,000. That was what my life boiled down to after 40 years of homeownership. Penny pinching and saying no to things I wanted so I could say yes to Calvin. But I didn't flinch. I wired the money without hesitation, without a contract, without asking for my name on the deed, because mothers don't ask for proof. Mothers just give. And so I moved to Hartwell, a town I didn't know, into a house I helped pay for but didn't belong to. Calvin called it our home, but it was always his. My room was small, tucked behind the laundry room, with a window facing the neighbor's garage. But I told myself it was enough. I had my son, his wife Amanda, and their daughter Sophie. I'd be useful. I'd cook, fold laundry, pick Sophie up from school, tell her bedtime stories. The first few months weren't so bad. Amanda smiled tightly when I washed the dishes before she got to them. Sophie liked my old stories, especially the one about how Calvin once glued his hand to a lunch tray in 2nd grade. Calvin didn't laugh as much, but I figured he was stressed. Owning a business was hard. His printing shop was a quiet building near the highway. Nothing fancy. He said the big investment would come later. New machines, bulk paper orders, a marketing revamp. He had a vision, and I believed in it because I believed in him. I never asked where the money went, but I saw things. A flashy new espresso machine in the shop, a weekend trip to Phoenix that he called networking. Then came the calls from banks, the late nights pacing in the kitchen, the "we're working on it" excuses. I didn't push. I just made tea. Somewhere along the line, I became the wallpaper of the household. Quiet, always there, but never seen. Amanda started calling me Elaine instead of Mom. Calvin spent more time sighing than speaking. Sophie drifted, as teenagers do, but I noticed when she stopped hugging me good night, I noticed everything. But I kept giving. Last spring, when the heater broke, I used what was left of my pension to cover it without telling them. Amanda said, "Thank you." But in that polite, distant way you'd thank a stranger who handed you a napkin, Calvin didn't say anything at all. I still baked on Sundays, still smiled when Sophie walked in the room, still folded Calvin's favorite plaid shirt, the one I bought him before his college interview. I kept trying. I think that's what made his words cut so deep when they finally came. You don't expect a revenge story to begin at a family dinner with pot roast and mashed potatoes. But life doesn't always wait for dramatic music or thunderclaps. Sometimes betrayal sneaks up in soft moments, like your birthday, when you wear your best sweater and light candles hoping someone will say, "We're glad you're here." They didn't. Instead, they watched as my son told me I was the reason his life was falling apart. And I smiled, even then, because part of me still hoped he didn't mean it. But deep inside, something cracked. This chapter isn't about revenge. It's about what a mother gives and what it costs her to finally stop giving. It didn't happen all at once. I wish I could point to a day, an hour, a moment and say, there. That's when he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. But the truth is, the change was slow. It was in the way he stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Elaine. It was in how Amanda began to roll her eyes when I offered to help with dinner. It was in the fact that Sophie, my sweet granddaughter, barely looked up from her phone when I walked into a room. Maybe you felt it too, the shift in the air, the way silence becomes heavier, the way every thank you becomes less about gratitude and more about obligation. At first, I blamed myself. I figured I was too nosy, too present, maybe too old-fashioned. I told myself I'd been hovering too much, offering advice no one asked for, folding laundry before Amanda had a chance, telling Sophie to wear socks on cold mornings. That was the kind of woman I was. The fixer, the doer, the helper. I didn't know how to be in a home and not contribute. But what I hadn't realized was that my help had quietly become unwelcome. It started with small remarks. One evening, Amanda came home to find me cooking spaghetti. Calvin was working late, and I figured it'd be nice to have a hot meal waiting. She didn't smile. She walked past me, opened the pantry, and muttered. We were going to order Thai. I offered to put it away. She waved her hand and said, "It's fine, but maybe next time you could ask first." I apologized. Of course. But I remember standing at the stove, wondering when my gestures had started to feel like intrusions. Then came the rules. We're trying not to use fabric softener anymore. Sophie's clothes keep smelling weird. Can you knock before going into the laundry room? Amanda leaves her yoga mat there. Please don't bring up stories from when Calvin was a kid. He doesn't like being embarrassed in front of Sophie. Little by little, my presence was being shaved down, like an old pencil worn thin from use. I know some of you out there have felt that quiet exile too. Have you ever lived under the same roof as your family, but felt like a stranger in your own life? If you have, then you understand the ache I carried every night as I sat in my little room behind the laundry, listening to laughter through thin walls and wondering when I'd become invisible. It wasn't just emotional. Either, there was the matter of space, physical, tangible space. When I first moved in, I kept my belongings to one dresser and a closet. Then Amanda asked if I could maybe store the photo albums in the attic. Next came my old teapot, my knitting basket, the bird figurines from my windowsill. Bit by bit, pieces of me were disappearing. But the hardest part wasn't losing space, it was losing voice. One afternoon, Sophie was having trouble with a school project. She had to write about someone she admired, and I offered to help brainstorm. I told her about Marie Curie, Eleanor Roosevelt, Shirley Chisholm, strong women, brave women. She smiled a little. I thought I was getting through, but then Amanda walked in. Don't fill her head with outdated stuff, she said, picking up her phone. She's got a whole internet to pull from. She doesn't need bedtime history lessons. I laughed politely, but I felt the sting. And later that night, I heard Amanda telling Calvin that I was trying too hard to be relevant. Relevant. That word kept echoing in my mind. Was that all I was now? An elderly woman trying too hard to matter. It's a terrible thing. Realizing that the people you love have already decided you've outlived your usefulness. Calvin barely looked at me anymore. Our conversations had become functional, transactional. Really? Can you grab the mail? Did Sophie take her lunch? Turn off the porch light when you're done. There was no more, how are you, Mom, or want to go for a drive. He was slipping away, but I was still standing in place, still holding the memories of scraped knees and science fairs and midnight cereal talks after heartbreaks. Maybe that was the cruelest part, how I remembered everything, and he remembered nothing that mattered. The air in that house changed, somewhere between my arrival and my silence. I just didn't notice until it was too thick to breathe in. I began to shrink myself, eat quicker, speak less, disappear into rooms like a guest who had overstayed. But I still cooked Sunday dinners, still folded his shirts the way he liked, still tucked small notes into Sophie's backpack, because I hadn't accepted it yet. Not fully. I hadn't accepted that love, no matter how deeply given. could be pushed aside when it became inconvenient. That's what I learned that season. Not just how cruel people can be, but how cruelty wears soft clothing. It smiles. It thanks you politely. And then it rewrites the rules around you so quietly that you don't realize you've already lost your seat at the table. And still, I stayed. Because even when mothers are no longer seen, they stay. Until they can't anymore. Birthdays in our family used to mean something. Earl, my late husband, always insisted that we make them special. Even when we were broke, a birthday, he used to say, isn't about the gifts. It's about reminding someone they still matter. I suppose that's why I still make an effort. Even now, with so many years between Earl's voice and this quiet little house in Hartwell, I still wake up on my birthday and try to feel hopeful. This year, I got up early, ironed my blouse, and put on the string of pearls Earl gave me for our 25th anniversary. I made a lemon cake, my own mother's recipe, and roasted a small chicken with rosemary and garlic. I wasn't expecting balloons or surprises. I just thought maybe Calvin and Amanda would sit down with me. Maybe Sophie would look up from her phone and say, "Happy birthday, Grandma." Just that would have been enough. When they walked in, Calvin didn't even glance at the candles I'd lit. Amanda looked at the dining table like it was an inconvenience. Sophie said nothing at all. I smiled anyway. I sat down across from them and placed the casserole dish in the center like I had something to celebrate. The silence at that table was thick, like it had grown roots into the walls. "So," I said, after several minutes, "I thought it might be nice to eat together. It's been a while." No one responded. I reached for the mashed potatoes. "I used your favorite garlic butter, Calvin." He didn't look up. He just stabbed his fork into a piece of chicken and said, "You always do this." I blinked. "Do what?" "Make everything about you," he snapped. "The dinners, the stories, the expectations." Amanda set her napkin down like she'd been waiting for the fight to start. "You act like we owe you something just because you helped with the house." My stomach dropped. "I never said you owed me, but it's always there," he said, voice rising. "That unspoken thing. Like we're supposed to bend over backward just because you gave us money." I felt my face flush. "I gave it because I wanted to help you. Because I love you." "Well, maybe," he said, leaning back. "You should have just stayed in that old house instead of dragging your guilt here." It felt like the table tilted beneath me. "I gave up everything to be closer to you," I whispered. "My home, my garden, my life. You gave up what you wanted." He snapped. "You didn't ask if we wanted it." That's when Amanda chimed in. "We've been patient, Elaine, but this can't keep going. The way you interfere, the way you judge, you can't just insert yourself into everything." "I live here," I said quietly. "And that's exactly the problem," Amanda muttered. Sophie looked up for the first time then, wide-eyed, clearly stunned. I saw something flicker across her face, embarrassment, maybe even guilt. But she said nothing. "I'm not trying to be a problem," I said. I just thought today, maybe, that we'd all celebrate you." Calvin scoffed. "That we'd sit around the table and pretend things are great just because you made dinner. You know what? Mom, you ruined everything. My business is falling apart. Amanda's exhausted. And Sophie can't even relax in her own house because you're always around, always watching, always making us feel like we're doing something wrong. I've done everything I could to make your life easier," I said, my hands trembling now. "I gave you money. I take care of the house. I stay out of your way. And this is what I get." Calvin stood up. "You want a medal for that? You want us to worship you just because you made some sacrifices decades ago?" "No," I said, slowly rising to my feet. "I just wanted to feel like I still mattered." He laughed, cold and sharp. "Well, you don't? Not here. Not anymore." I didn't cry. I wish I could say I stood there with tears in my eyes and a voice breaking with sorrow. But I didn't. I stood tall, my spine straighter than it had been in years, and said, "You don't have to worry. I'll be gone by morning." Amanda said nothing. Calvin looked relieved. Sophie looked like she wanted to disappear. I walked to my room. No, not my room. just the space they'd let me occupy, and closed the door, for the first time in years. I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like something worse, something discarded. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small photo on my nightstand, me and Calvin when he was 7, holding a paper kite. Both of us laughing. I stared at that picture for a long time, trying to figure out where that little boy had gone. But he wasn't coming back. The house was quiet again. And for once, I didn't feel bad about it. Because in that silence, I heard the truth echo louder than any birthday wish ever could. I was no longer welcome. And maybe, just maybe, I'd never truly been. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the little room I'd called mine for almost 3 years. The place they'd offered as a gesture of generosity. And yet, it had always felt like I was borrowing oxygen. I kept hearing Calvin's voice echo in my head. You ruined everything. Not here. Not anymore. It would have been easier if he'd said those words in a moment of rage. Something he didn't mean. Something he might regret in the morning. But the way he looked at me. Calm. Cold. Like I was an unwanted package left on his doorstep. That was what stuck with me. So I got up before the sun and began packing my things. There weren't many, just a suitcase, some clothes, my journal, and a small wooden box where I kept important papers. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because I was hollow. Moving fast would have made the silence too loud. I opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand, the one they never bothered to check. Inside were bank statements, letters, and a folder with photocopies, just things I had kept over time without really thinking why. I hadn't looked at them in a while. Most were mundane, but one page caught my eye. A loan confirmation letter, addressed to Elaine Mercer, dated almost 2 years ago. But I never took out a loan. I blinked at the figure. $80,000, issued by a small federal business support program. I didn't remember signing anything. I certainly never received a dime. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe a letter misaddressed. But no, my full name, my old signature, and Calvin's business name as the listed recipient of the funds. I reread it 3 times. My hands started to tremble. He used my name. He'd forged my identity to apply for a federal loan. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was denial. There has to be an explanation. Maybe I signed something I didn't understand. Maybe he told me about it and I forgot. But I didn't forget things like that. I took the folder into the bathroom and locked the door. Sitting on the closed toilet lid, I pulled out every piece of paper I'd kept. Hidden among them was a carbon copy of a loan application. Calvin's handwriting in some places, my signature at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. Not really. It looked like mine, but it was too careful, like someone had traced it from another page. And then I remembered. A year and a half ago, he'd brought me a stack of documents when I was watching Sophie. He'd said it was something for the tax office, just routine stuff. Sign here, Mom, just a formality. I hadn't read them because I trusted him. I felt sick. I took a deep breath, tried to calm my pulse. Then I slipped the papers into a manila envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the bottom of my suitcase. Not out of spite, not because I wanted revenge, because I needed to protect myself. That was the moment everything shifted. Not when he yelled, not when Amanda sat back and watched, not even when I told them I'd leave, but there, in the bathroom at dawn, holding evidence of betrayal in my own name. That's when the light switched on. I wasn't just unwanted, I was used. That realization burned hotter than any insult Calvin had ever thrown at me. When the house finally began to stir, I was dressed and ready. Amanda didn't come downstairs. Sophie peeked out of her room, but quickly disappeared again. Calvin was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. He looked up. You need help packing? I'm done, I said evenly. He nodded like we were business partners finalizing a deal. I'll drive you to the bus stop. I've arranged a ride. I lied. He didn't ask who. There wasn't a thank you. No apology. No regret. Just that same blank detachment. Like I was a tenant whose lease had ended. He opened the front door for me. As I stepped outside, I glanced back. The house looked exactly the same. The rug, I picked. The vase I bought at the farmer's market, the hooks where I hung my sweaters. None of it felt like mine. The wind was sharp that morning, even for early spring. It cut through my coat and made my eyes water, though I can't say for sure the cold was to blame. I walked down the driveway without turning back. My ride, a cab I'd scheduled before dawn, pulled up right on time. The driver, a kind young man named Diego, helped me with my suitcase. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," I said, and I almost believed it. As we pulled away from the curb, I took one last look at the house through the back window. No one watched me leave. No one waved. It was like I'd never been there at all. But inside my suitcase, sealed in a manila envelope, was the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had something solid to stand on. Not anger, not heartbreak, clarity. That morning, I didn't feel like a mother who'd been rejected. I felt like a woman who finally saw everything for what it was. Winifred's house smelled like cinnamon and old books, just the way I remembered it. She met me at the door in her usual oversized cardigan and red lipstick that never quite matched her skin tone, but made her look unapologetically alive. Her silver hair was tied in a loose bun, and her cat, Leopold, darted between her legs like he owned the place. When I stepped inside, something inside me exhaled. "You didn't have to come all the way out," I told her as she helped me drag my suitcase through the door. "Nonsense," she said, shutting it firmly behind me. "No one throws out my best friend on her birthday and gets away with it, especially not her own son." I wanted to smile at her indignation, but I felt too tired. Bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that builds when you've been carrying too much for too long. She led me to the blue guest room, the one facing the garden. I'd stayed in it once years ago when Earl had surgery, and I didn't want to be alone. Back then, it had felt temporary. This time, it felt like relief. There were fresh sheets on the bed, a small vase of lilacs on the nightstand, and a note written in her messy, looping handwriting. "You still matter here." I pressed my lips together to keep from crying. Winifred let me settle in before calling me down for tea. She was always like that, offering comfort without crowding, warmth without questions. We sat in her kitchen, sipping chamomile as the wind knocked softly against the window panes. "I'm not staying long," I told her, though even as I said it, I didn't believe it. "You'll stay as long as you need," she said. "No one kicks out a woman like you and expects her to just land on her feet in 24 hours. I didn't tell her about the loan documents. Not yet. That truth still felt like a storm I hadn't walked fully into. I needed to be steady on my feet first. "What are you going to do?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I said. Part of me wants to forget it happened. Move on. Another part of me wants to... I trailed off. "Burn it all down," she offered with a raised eyebrow. I laughed. "Just a little. Maybe not burn. Just reclaim what's mine." Quietly. "Then start here," she said. "Start by remembering who you are when you're not trying so hard to be someone's mother." That sentence stuck with me all night. Who was I without motherhood at the center of everything? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. For decades, every decision I'd made was through the lens of motherhood. Work, sacrifice, support. I had poured myself into Calvin like a well that never expected to be refilled. But now I had to live for someone else. Me. It's strange. Starting over at 73. The world doesn't really expect much from you. In fact, most people act like you're winding down, coasting toward the end. But what if that wasn't true? What if this moment after the rejection, after the betrayal, after the heartbreak, was the beginning of something? The next morning, I took a walk around Winifred's garden. Spring was just beginning to stretch its legs. Daffodils pushing through the soil. Buds on the hydrangeas. Life, even after frost. And something about that made me feel possible again. I went back inside and pulled out my notebook. Not a journal, not a list, just a page. And I wrote at the top what I want for me. It felt foreign, selfish almost, but I made myself right. Drink coffee on the porch every morning. Visit the library again. Teach Sophie how to bake if she ever wants to come. Take a ceramics class. Call Helen, my old coworker. Wear my red coat. Rest. I stared at the list for a long time, then added one more. Speak the truth. When I'm ready. That afternoon, Winifred peeked into the room. I called Jeremy. She said, he's still on the city ethics board. Said he'd be happy to meet with you if you want. I didn't answer right away because I wasn't quite ready to start the storm. But I was ready to hold the umbrella. Not yet, I said, but soon, she nodded. Like she understood completely. Let's go into town tomorrow, she said. You could use some new slippers, I smiled. Mine are still in Calvin's house. Then that's a perfect excuse, she said. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind was soft, carrying the smell of lilacs. I tucked the manila envelope with the loan documents under the bed, not to hide it, but to keep it close, because this time, I wasn't going to forget what I knew. This time, I wasn't going to wait for someone else to decide what I was worth. And when the time came to speak up, whether it was to Calvin, to the authorities, or just to myself, I'd be ready, not to punish, not to destroy, but to reclaim the quiet kind of power I never even knew I had. A week passed before I heard from Calvin again. Not a call, not a message, just a short email with the subject line, "Need clarification for tax filing." He was referring to the loan, of course, the one he took out in my name without telling me, the one I now had all the documents for. The email was written in that clipped, formal tone he used when he wanted to pretend everything was normal. "Mom, can you confirm the date you signed the SBA paperwork? The accountant needs it. Thanks." There was no apology, no explanation. Just a request. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at Winifred's kitchen table, sipping strong black coffee and reading the email over and over. And I realized something. He still thought I would play along. He still thought I was the same woman who signed without reading, gave without asking, forgave without hesitation. But I wasn't her anymore. I hadn't told Winifred everything, not yet, but I had told her enough. That I was done being a background character in my own story. That I had something he didn't think I was smart enough to keep. Evidence. I forwarded the email to a woman named Clarice, an attorney Winifred had found through her retired teachers network. Clarice was in her early 60s, wore bold glasses, and didn't mince words. She looked over the loan paperwork, the forged signature, the email trail. "Legally, this is fraud," she said. "But what's more important is that you're not imagining this. You were used, Elaine, and you don't need to stay silent about it." I felt something shift in me again. Stronger this time. Not anger, not vengeance, but clarity, deep and steady. The next day, Clarice filed a quiet report with the Small Business Administration's fraud office. She told me I didn't have to press charges yet, that I could let them investigate and decide later. But even taking that small step felt like I was standing upright again for the first time in years. You might think I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt sad, deeply, painfully sad, because I finally accepted that my son saw me not as a mother, but as a resource, something to use, something to mine. And when I dried up, he moved on. Still, I didn't tell anyone in town. I didn't share it on Facebook or march into Calvin's office with documents in hand. That's not my way. Instead, I took a walk around the lake that weekend. I wore my red coat, the one I'd almost thrown away after Amanda made fun of it for looking too bright for your age. The sun was out. Ducks were gathered near the bank. And as I stood there, watching the water ripple, I felt light. Not because anything had been fixed yet, but because, for the first time, I wasn't pretending anymore. Tell me something. If you've made it this far, have you ever been treated like a burden by the people you gave everything to? Did you ever walk away? Not in anger, but in dignity. If so, I hope you know you are not alone. That evening, I baked again. Not for anyone else, just for me and Winifred. Blueberry scones. We sat by the window, breaking them open with butter, and I told her about the lake, about the ducks, about how strange it felt to be free. "You're not done," she said. "You're just getting started." That night, I wrote another list in my notebook. What I've taken back, my voice, my name, my space, my worth. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. No one clapped or cheered, but I felt the shift. And the next morning, when I walked into the local library to apply for a part-time volunteer position, I did it not because I needed to fill time, but because I had time that was finally mine again. The librarian smiled and handed me a simple form. I filled it out carefully. Name, Elaine Mercer. Phone, my new cell, not tied to Calvin's plan anymore. Emergency contact, Winifred Carver. That last part made me smile, because it wasn't just a name. It was proof that I still had people, that love didn't only exist through bloodlines and last names. Sometimes, the people who show up late in the story are the ones who help you write the ending right. And mine was just starting to take shape, quietly, firmly, on my own terms. It had been nearly 3 weeks since I left Calvin's house, long enough for the sting to dull, but not enough for the wound to vanish. Every morning, I walked to the post office just after sunrise. It became a small ritual. Coat on, scarf tied, one hand in my pocket, the other clutching my coffee thermos. The people at the counter started recognizing me. Morning, Miss Mercer, they'd say, and I'd nod like someone who had always belonged. But this time, there was a letter waiting for me. No return address. I didn't open it there. I waited until I got back to Winifred's kitchen, the one that always smelled like toasted rye and lemon balm. I sat down, peeled the envelope open, and read the one thing I never thought I'd see from Amanda. Elaine, I know I said too much that night. Maybe not with words, but with silence. I didn't stop him. And I should have. I've seen what he does to people. He steamrolls through feelings and twists the truth until even I forget what's real. But you never deserved that. You were good to us, even when we didn't deserve it. I'm sorry, Amanda. No warmth. No signature flourish. Just that. I'm sorry. I didn't cry, but I did let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. And then I opened the second letter, this one from Sophie, written in messy teenage script with ink smudges and a heart in the corner. Grandma, I miss your pancakes. Dad said you're figuring stuff out, but I know that's not the whole story. I looked up what SBA fraud is. I'm not dumb. I saw the papers in the drawer before you left. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I believe you never meant to hurt anyone. I hope I get to see you again soon. And I hope you're okay. Love, Sophie. That one cracked something open inside me. It wasn't a full reckoning. Not yet. But it was something. A sliver of truth from two people who had stayed silent far too long. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in my notebook, behind the list titled, What I've Taken Back. Later that day, I walked into town and made my first purchase in months. A locked mailbox at the UPS store. A small gesture, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. An address that was mine. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Mine. That evening, I sat with Winifred in her backyard, wrapped in a blanket as the stars came out. Fireflies blinked in the grass like little reminders that light always returns. Did you write back? She asked. Not yet, I said. Will you? I don't know, she nodded, sipping her tea. You don't owe them anything, but that doesn't mean you don't get to choose. I nodded. She was right. As always, there's something quietly powerful about having a choice again, about deciding who gets your energy, who gets your words. That night, I didn't think about Calvin. I didn't rehearse what I'd say if I ever saw him again. I didn't wish for apologies. I thought about Sophie, about the space between betrayal and healing, about the way that girl, still half a child, had seen more truth than the adults around her. And I hoped, more than anything, that she would grow up learning to stand her ground, even if it meant standing alone, because that's what I was doing now, and it didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was repotting the lavender outside Winifred's kitchen. My hands were deep in the soil, nails chipped and covered in dirt. When I heard my new phone buzzing from the porch table, I wiped my hands on my apron, picked it up, and saw the name, Calvin. For a second, I just stared at the screen. A few weeks ago, I would have felt my stomach twist. I would have wondered what tone he'd use. Cold, angry, or worse. Apologetic in a way that asked for silence. But not today. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I went back to the lavender. A minute later, he called again. This time, I answered. "Hello, Mom," he said, too quickly. "I didn't expect you to pick up. What do you want?" "Calvin." My voice didn't shake. He sighed like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Look, I think things got out of hand. I didn't mean to say what I said on your birthday. We were all tired. Amanda was stressed. And you've been emotional. So No, I said. You don't get to explain it away like that. Not this time." There was silence on the other end. And then, like he hadn't heard me at all, he launched into what sounded like a prepared speech. I spoke to the accountant. The SBA loan situation. It's not that big of a deal. It's just paperwork. We can clear it up. I repeated. He hesitated. It'll look better if you cooperate. If you just clarify that you knew what was being signed, that it wasn't fraud. They might drop the investigation if you submit a letter. It'd help my business. And Amanda, I'm not writing a letter. Another silence. I'm your son. Yes, I said. And I was your mother. The kind who gave you everything. My savings, my trust, my time, and you repaid it by stealing my name. His voice cracked just a little. You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a lie you thought I'd never find. He didn't respond. I'm not pressing charges. Calvin. Not yet. But I'm not covering for you either. You'd ruin me. No, I said. You did that all by yourself. There was a long pause. Then he said, I guess I shouldn't have called. And I said, that's the first honest thing you've said all year. I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor. I didn't reread the conversation in my mind like a script I should have changed. I just went back to the lavender, pressed the soil down gently, and whispered, grow, sweetheart. Later that night, Winifred brought out a bottle of wine she'd been saving. For what? I asked. For the moment you finally chose yourself, she said. We toasted quietly under the stars, not in celebration of revenge, but in honor of something quieter. Peace. That call could have broken me, but instead, it confirmed what I already knew. Calvin wasn't sorry. He was scared, and that fear wasn't mine to carry. It never was. It was a Sunday afternoon when Amanda showed up. No call, no warning. Just the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway and the slam of a car door. I was in the garden trimming back the wild marigold when I saw her standing by the porch steps, arms crossed, sunglasses still on. She looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just smaller somehow. Elaine, she said, like we were acquaintances who hadn't spoken in years, instead of families separated by silence and choices. Winifred was inside baking a pear tart. She hadn't seen Amanda pull in, and for a moment, I considered walking inside and pretending I hadn't either, but I wiped my hands on my apron and met her by the porch. You shouldn't have come without calling, I said. She removed her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes looked tired. I didn't think you'd answer if I did. She wasn't wrong. We stood there, the spring breeze tugging gently at the hem of my sweater. Amanda glanced around like she wasn't sure if she was welcome or being watched. I needed to see you, she said. I needed you to hear something in person. I'm listening. She hesitated, then said softly, you were right. About Calvin. About the loan. About everything. I blinked, but didn't speak. I found out after you left. She went on. Bits and pieces. At first I thought you were just being dramatic. That you were overreacting. But then I found the duplicate applications in the office drawer. Your signature was copied. He admitted it. Eventually, and you stayed? I said. She looked down at her shoes. Yes. Why? Because I was scared. Because I thought protecting the family meant protecting the lie. I shook my head. You watched him humiliate me in front of Sophie. You let him throw me out on my birthday. And you said nothing. I know, she whispered. And I'll carry that. We stood in silence. I came because... Amanda's voice faltered. Sophie misses you. She's asking questions. She's angry at us, but I think she still hopes there's a way to fix some of it. I don't know what she's been told, I said, but I hope she knows that I never left her. She does, Amanda said quickly. She says you're the only one who ever really listened. For a moment, the earth tilted. I thought of all the nights I sat beside that girl while she talked about school, or braided her hair, or let her sit beside me in silence while her parents argued upstairs. I hadn't realized I'd made such a mark. Maybe because, back then, I didn't feel like I was doing anything special. I was just being there. Amanda cleared her throat. Would you consider writing to her? I already have, I said. But I didn't send it. She nodded. She'd like that. I turned toward the porch. You can stay for tea. But I won't talk about Calvin. Not today. Amanda looked surprised. You'd let me in. You came all this way. Might as well taste Winifred's tart. As we sat on the porch steps with mismatched mugs and warm pear slices, I watched her quietly absorb the air of the place, the safety, the slowness, the stillness. She said, you seem different. I am, I said, not harder, just more awake. To those of you watching, have you ever had someone come back too late? Did you let them in? Or did you stay behind your boundary? It's not weakness to forgive, but it's strength to choose what you need, without guilt. When Amanda left an hour later, she didn't ask for anything else. She didn't beg me to talk to Calvin or smooth things over. She simply hugged me. Not tightly, not desperately, just long enough to say she remembered who I had once been to her, and maybe who I still was. But I didn't confuse that moment for closure. It was just a soft breeze after a long winter, welcomed, but not relied on. It was a Thursday morning when the letter arrived, stamped in blue, United States Small Business Administration, Office of Inspector General. Return address, Washington, D. This weight, heavier than its envelope. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen table like it might bite. Winifred glanced at it over her coffee but didn't say a word. She knew better than to push. Instead, we talked about the tulips that were coming in crooked this year, about the old radio in the garage that finally gave out, and how maybe I should go to the library more often now that I was volunteering twice a week. Normal things, small things, things that reminded me I had a life outside of what Calvin did. After breakfast, I opened it. The letter was brief, but clear. Mrs. Elaine Mercer, we have concluded the preliminary investigation regarding fraudulent loan activity under your name. Based on the documents you provided and our independent inquiry, we have referred the case to the Department of Justice for further action. You are not a subject of investigation at this time. We will contact you if additional information is needed. Sincerely, Office of Inspector General. I read it twice, then once more, and then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my notebook. Behind Sophie's letter, it was done. Or rather, mine was done. What came next wasn't up to me. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I sat very still, watching the sunlight spill across the table and settle on the edge of my teacup. The world had shifted slightly, not in a loud way, but like a door quietly locking behind me. He had done it to himself, and I had stopped covering for him. That afternoon, I took a walk to the lake, not because I needed air, but because I needed to feel something more than just the heavy weight of justice. The path was quiet. The wind carried the smell of pine and water. I passed a father teaching his young daughter how to skip stones, her tiny laugh echoing down the trail. For a moment, I felt a strange ache, not for Calvin, but for the little boy he once was, the one who held my hand with too much grip, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest when he had nightmares. I grieved him that day, not the man he became, but the child I once knew, because what do you do when your greatest act of love, motherhood, becomes the stage for your deepest betrayal? You mourn it. You release it. And then you let that grief make room for something else. That night, I sat with Winifred on the back porch, watching the stars flicker to life. I got the letter, I said. She didn't ask which one. She just nodded. And it's out of my hands now. Does it feel like justice? No, I said honestly. It feels like truth. And that's enough. We sat in silence for a while before I added, I don't want to tell Sophie what's happening. Not yet. Let her keep the part of her that still believes her father is fixable. You think he's not? I shook my head slowly. I think he doesn't want to be. And that was the hardest truth of all. The next morning, I did something small but meaningful. I donated the red folder, all of it, photocopies, notes, the letter from the lawyer to Clarice for safekeeping, not to bury it, but to free myself from having to look at it every day. And then I bought a new pair of shoes. That might not sound like much, but for women like us, women who've spent years putting others first, it was revolutionary. They were practical shoes, but beautiful, sturdy, quiet, like me. Later that day, I got an email from the SBA office. One line stood out. Thank you for your cooperation and integrity throughout this process. Integrity, a word I hadn't seen written about me in years. Not supportive, not selfless, not helpful, but whole. To anyone watching who's ever been betrayed by their own blood, have you ever quietly taken back your power without telling anyone? Not for applause, not for drama, but just to feel whole again. If so, I see you, and I hope you know that is enough. A few days later, Amanda texted me, just a short note. He knows the SBA contacted you. He's been spiraling. I don't think he'll recover from this. I stared at it for a moment and then deleted it. I didn't need updates. I didn't need his pain to validate my truth. What mattered was this. He had gambled with my name, and I had taken it back. Not loudly, not violently, but with enough quiet strength to shake the world beneath him. It came in the mail, thick cardstock, sealed with wax, an actual dinner invitation. At first, I thought it was from the church or the community center. Maybe a fundraiser or a retirement celebration for someone I barely knew. But when I opened it, I froze. It was from Sophie, handwritten in her careful script. Grandma, I'm turning 17 in 2 weeks. We're doing a small dinner at a restaurant in town. Nothing fancy. Just me, Mom, and a few friends. But I want you there. No pressure. If you come, it would mean the world to me. Love, Sophie. Below the signature, she added a note. P. So I told them I invited you. They didn't argue. I must have read the note a dozen times. She didn't say Dad wants you there. She didn't say, we want to make peace. She just said she wanted me. It had been months since I'd seen her. The last time was that awful birthday night, mine, not hers, when the people I thought I'd raised with love turned their backs and slammed the door behind me. But Sophie, she had always been different, quiet, but perceptive, the kind of girl who noticed things people hoped she wouldn't. Still, I hesitated. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want a staged apology from Calvin, or Amanda trying to serve small talk like hors d'oeuvres. I didn't want to sit across a white tablecloth and pretend I hadn't been erased from my own family. But Sophie wanted me, and that mattered more than my pride. Winifred, of course, had thoughts. You sure about this? She asked, leaning on the kitchen counter with her arms crossed. You don't owe them anything. I'm not going for them, I said. I'm going for her. She nodded slowly. Then go in your power, not in their shadow. I smiled. That's the only way I know how to go anymore. I wore a navy dress I'd had for years, the one with tiny white flowers and a soft collar. It wasn't new, but it was mine. I paired it with the pearl earrings Earl gave me on our 20th anniversary because sometimes you carry love in small, visible ways. The restaurant was quiet. A converted farmhouse just outside town, lit with soft amber lamps and linen napkins folded like swans. I walked in with my head high. The hostess looked up. Reservation under Sophie, I said. She smiled and led me to the back. And there they were. Amanda stood when she saw me, hesitant, unsure. Calvin remained seated, his jaw tight, staring at his water glass like it held some kind of answer. But Sophie lit up. Grandma, she said, rushing forward to hug me. It was a full hug, not a polite one, not the kind teenagers give out of obligation. The table was set for 6. 3 friends of hers sat nearby, all with phones in hand. Barely glancing up, I sat down slowly. "Thank you for coming," Sophie said softly. Her voice was so calm, so sincere. It nearly undid me. Amanda reached for a menu. "We're just ordering. The trout here is lovely." I nodded, but said nothing. Calvin didn't look at me for the first 10 minutes. He cleared his throat once, twice. Finally, he muttered, "You look well." "Thank you," I said. Silence settled. But not on me. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the version of myself who had once asked to stay in their basement room. I was not the woman who had cooked dinners just to be ignored, who had walked out of her own birthday like a ghost. I was me now, fully, quietly, without apology. Dinner passed slowly. Sophie chatted with her friends. Amanda asked about weather and Winifred's garden. Calvin mostly stared into his plate. And then, as dessert was served, Sophie leaned in and whispered, "I have something for you." She handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a poem, one she'd written herself. It wasn't long, just a few lines. She stood like the last tree in a storm, unshaken by lightning, roots deep with memory. And though no one watered her, she bloomed anyway. I looked up. Sophie met my eyes and smiled. "I wrote it after you left," she said. I had to look away to keep my composure. I wasn't one to cry in public. To those of you listening, has anyone ever reminded you of your strength when you nearly forgot it yourself? Sometimes it's not a loud speech. Sometimes it's a quiet line, a glance, a poem from a granddaughter who sees the truth before the adults do. As the check was paid and jacket slipped on, Calvin finally looked at me. I heard about the letter from the SBA. I held his gaze. "I'm not here to talk about that," I said. He nodded once. "Okay." Amanda walked beside him in silence, but Sophie stayed close to me. At the parking lot, she hugged me again. "Will you come see me again? Maybe just us?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that," she nodded. "I'm glad you didn't disappear." "I thought I had," I whispered. "But maybe I just needed to be seen again." She smiled. "I see you." And in that moment, I knew I hadn't lost everything. I had lost them, but I hadn't lost me. Spring arrived gently in Hartwell, painting Winifred's garden in pastel blooms and the hum of honeybees. I sat on the wooden bench beneath the wisteria arbor, a wool shawl around my shoulders, and watched the sunlight dance across the tulips. It felt like the world itself had taken a breath, and so had I. After months of upheaval, betrayal, and quiet reckoning, I finally understood. My story wasn't ending with that birthday dinner. It was just beginning. Each morning now starts with coffee on that same bench, the steam fogging my glasses as I read the local paper or jot thoughts in my notebook. Mornings are my own again. After breakfast, I head to the town library for my volunteer shift, cataloging new arrivals, helping seniors find large print mysteries, recommending recipes that bring back leader memories. The staff greets me by name. I'm not just Calvin's mother anymore. I'm Elaine. Elaine the reader, the helper, the woman who made her own way back into life's narrative. Afternoons find me in a ceramic studio down the block, hunched over a wheel, coaxing clay into gentle curves. My hands, once trembling with hurt, now shape beauty from earth. I've signed up for a weekly book club that meets at Gina's Bakery, cinnamon rolls and strong tea included. Last month, we debated To Kill a Mockingbird until our voices were hoarse. The week before, we shared grief and laughter over Midnight's Children. In the evenings, Winifred and I attend art shows or community concerts under the stars. I still pinch myself when I realize I'm living this fully, something I never thought possible after feeling so cast aside financially. I'm secure. The proceeds from the house I sold, some funds returned after the SBA investigation, and my retirement savings form a tidy portfolio managed by a local advisor. More importantly, I set up an education fund for Sophie and Gar, protected legally so that Calvin and Amanda have no access. It isn't vengeance. It's ensuring the grandchildren have choices in their futures, even if their parents once turned their backs on me. Every statement I receive reminds me that I'm not defined by betrayal, but by the dignity I reclaimed. Emotionally, there's no denial of loss. I still ache for the daughter who screamed and the son who used my name as collateral. But that ache is tempered by peace. I don't wake up expecting their calls. I don't replay apologies that never came. Instead, I hold close the moments that matter. Sophie's poems sliding under my door. Gar's shy wave when he visits on weekends with his football gear and earnest questions about my books. I gifted Gar his grandfather's pocket watch, a symbol of time's forward march, and told him, "Hold on to this when life feels chaotic." He nodded solemnly, like a boy who understands more than his years. My relationship with the grandchildren is a quiet triumph. Sophie and I exchange postcards. She writes from her college applications. I reply with snapshots of my garden's progress. Gar and I share fishing trips by the riverbank. He's still the curious child, peppering me with questions about wildlife and weather. They didn't need me to save their parents. They just needed me to be there, an anchor in the turbulence. And that's enough. I've never felt the need for dramatic revenge. My vindication came in the form of truth revealed and boundaries redrawn. I didn't seek to ruin Calvin. I simply refused to be erased. The power of silent action, of handing over the forged loan documents and letting the law handle the rest, gave me more satisfaction than any public spectacle could host. Revenge is loud. Dignity is quiet. Lately, I've been working on my memoirs, not to sell, but to preserve. Pages filled with ordinary motherhood. First steps, school recitals, midnight fevers, scraped knees, and Valentine's Day cupcakes. I write about betrayal too, so others know it can happen, even to the best of us, and how you can rise again, unbowed. I plan a trip to Florida next winter, just to feel salt air on my face, and maybe, just maybe, see my grandchildren build sandcastles by the shore. This spring, I was invited to speak at the Hartwell Senior Center's luncheon on elder rights and independence. I nearly declined. Public speaking isn't my strongest suit. But then I thought, if my story can help one woman realize she still matters, it's worth a few nervous minutes. I shared my journey, how a mother's love can be taken for granted, how a woman's worth isn't tied to her home or her children's success, and how reclaiming your name is the most profound justice of all. The applause was soft but heartfelt. I saw tears in a few eyes, nods of recognition in others. I glance at my watch, engraved with Earl's initials, reminding me time never stops. I close my notebook and rise. The garden calls, the world awaits. I've learned that life isn't a single story, but a series of chapters. Some end in heartbreak, others begin in hope. To all of you who followed this journey, thank you. Thank you for listening to a woman most people wrote off as past it. Thank you for believing that, even at 73, you can start anew. Have you ever reached a point where you thought your story was over, only to realize a new chapter was waiting? Share your own quiet victories in the comments, because sometimes the strongest applause comes not from a crowd, but from knowing you stood firm in your truth.